What Russia's war means for the International Space Station. The International Space Station isn't above global politics. As the war in Ukraine goes on, there's a looming threat that Russia might ditch the International Space Station, a football field-sized satellite that currently houses several astronauts, and allow it to crash into Earth. This raises two scary questions. 1. Can Russia just drop the ISS on the planet? And 2. Is the post-Cold War era of space collaboration between Russia and the US coming to an end? The answers are complicated. The uncertain state of the ISS reflects the rift between its two main partners, who are currently clashing over Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine. Concerns that Russia might let the ISS fall to Earth came up at the end of February when Russian Space Chief Dmitry Rogozin raised the idea in a series of tweets complaining about new U.S. sanctions against Russia, including some aimed at its space program. The issue came up again in March after Rogozin suggested on a state-controlled Russian television show that if the U.S. continued to be hostile, Roscosmos would rescind its support for the ISS. Over the past weekend, Rogozin made the same threat again on his social media accounts, just days after NASA Administrator Bill Nelson told him in a letter that U.S. sanctions do not impact the two countries' ability to collaborate on the space station. But even if the ISS stays in orbit for now, and it almost certainly will, these ongoing tensions are a clear sign that the state of international collaboration in space is rapidly changing, and becoming much more sensitive to politics here on Earth. The safety of the ISS is a real concern. Russia controls critical aspects of the space station's propulsion control systems. While the ISS is in orbit, Earth's gravity gradually pulls it toward the atmosphere, so the space station typically uses a propulsion module, which is controlled by Russia, to keep it in place. Without these regular boosts, though, the ISS would very slowly fall toward the atmosphere, where it would mostly burn up. The astronauts aboard would likely have plenty of time to escape the space station and travel back to Earth. But some of us might not be as lucky. A number of heavy components that make up the ISS could survive the atmosphere and fall to the Earth's surface, where, without control over the ISS's deorbit, they could hit structures or kill people. Politics isn't supposed to influence the ISS again. There are many reasons why this is unlikely to happen. For one, NASA insists everything is fine. Rogozin is also known for bombastic statements. Destroying the space station isn't necessarily to Russia's advantage either. Roscosmos, Russia's space agency, may not want to take the risk of an uncontrolled deorbit, even if the ISS doesn't normally travel over much of Russia. And then there's the fact that just as NASA depends on Roscosmos to keep the ISS operational, Roscosmos also depends on NASA, and has a long history of working with the US, even through periods of tension. This is the nature of the ISS's founding partnership, which is now more than 2 decades old. The current situation is a result of decisions made basically 29 years ago to build a space station that was interdependent with Russia and the United States at its core. John Logsdon, the founder of George Washington University's Space Policy Institute, told Recode in March. This dependence on Russia for propulsion was not an accident. The future of space may not look as cooperative, though. Like the US, Russia wants to travel to the Moon, Mars, and, eventually, Venus and Jupiter. But as Roscosmos' waning commitment to the ISS makes clear, the space agency doesn't seem so interested anymore in working closely with the US. Instead, Roscosmos is gearing up to lead its own space explorations and work with other countries on its efforts, rather than NASA. This race is already playing out on the Moon. After the U.S. announced the Artemis program, a NASA-led international effort to explore and establish a human presence on the lunar surface, Russia and China announced that they would team up in a separate partnership to do something similar. We don't know exactly how these new politics of space will play out. We also don't know whether Russia's war on Ukraine will force the country to go it alone in space. But we do know that tensions between Russia and the US are driving Roscosmos and NASA apart. This is setting the groundwork for a new era of space collaboration, one that doesn't involve a singular international partnership, like the ISS does. but rather several different factions of spacefaring countries that sometimes will work together and sometimes won't. As Roscosmos's reaction to the war in Ukraine makes clear, this could become very tricky very